It gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce our next panel. It is Gal Talks, which is like the TED Talk format. So we have 4 amazing speakers who have prepared a short presentation. So like TED Talks, they won't be taking questions during, but after all 4 have spoken, they will we'll have a chance for some questions at the end that you can ask all of them. So in continuing with our theme of the conference in terms of how important it is to be an effective storyteller and in your advocacy for children, we are focusing on that for our Gal Talk. And we have a wonderful panel here this morning, as I said. We'll hear first from Ian Garlick, who is the CEO of Authentic Web, which is a very successful web marketing company. Ian specializes in helping his clients tell their stories in a very effective way. And I'll tell you, for those of you small firm lawyers out there who need help with internet marketing, Ian is your guy. I can tell you from experience, he has helped me tremendously, and also with the program. He redid our website for us and has just been a tremendous asset to the Guardian Ad Litem program over the past several years, so we really appreciate that. And he's a fantastic speaker, so you guys are in for a treat. We will then hear from Faye Clark, who is a Guardian Ad Litem volunteer. She started her career as a teacher, a special ed teacher, and through her career was actually responsible in her area for creating a database so that children in the school system, there was a link between foster kids and children in the school system so that teachers would know which of their students were in foster care, which of course is huge, and I'm sure it was incredibly helpful to the teachers. Once she retired, she has spent her retirement as a Guardian Ad Litem volunteer and has helped over 45 children. So I think I want to give her a special round of applause for that right now. Truly, that's what it's all about. So thank you, Faye. Faye is going to tell you about a special child that she represented. And that child was supposed to be here today, but she had something come up and was unable to be here. So her understudy is Roberta Katz, who's the program attorney who worked closely with Faye on the case. So Roberta and Faye will give you their story of how they advocated for this particular child. And then finally, we will hear from Judge Walker. Judge Walker is a longtime dependency judge. She's been a judge in Wakulla County for over 20 years, which is weird because I was a baby lawyer in her courtroom as both a public defender and a Guardian Ad Litem attorney, and if she had any gray hair, I'm sure some of them would be due to me. But it's weird because she looks exactly the same as she did over 20 years ago. So, but she is an incredible asset to the dependency bench. She's a winner of the Gladstone Award, which is a very prestigious award that's given out at the Dependency Summit. She is considered, while always very professional and dignified, also very compassionate in the courtroom. She has an incredibly child-friendly courtroom and was instrumental in helping the dogs in the courtroom getting that off its feet, and helped through her messaging and her work has helped spread that statewide. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ian, our first speaker. Who did he leave? No.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. Thank you all for having me here. You know, 8 years ago now, I got a call about a blog from a nonprofit, and they were having a problem with their blog, and it was a Guardian Ad Litem. And we went in, fixed the blog. I really had no idea what was going on. They're like, oh, we need to get in there. So we fixed it, and that was that. And about 3 years later, I get a call from Mary Kay. It's like, so Guardian Ad Litem, I'm like, yeah, like we have this conference coming up, and can you shoot the video? Well, Authentic Web, we do video marketing, so I'm like, of course we'll help you. You know, over the past 5 years, I've really learned a lot about the organization. We've not only shot the conference, but we've shot the stories of the attorneys, the volunteers, and the children. And those stories are so, so powerful. And I really, really am so thankful that you all are here. And I want you all to actually, you know, you've done a lot of clapping. I've watched you all over the years for the people up here. But really stand up and clap for each other because it's awesome work you do. Come on, everyone stand up. It's amazing, amazing work. Kelly, stand up. You all right? Thank you all so much for what you do. You know, another thing that changed in my life was I had a son 4 years ago. And you parents know the second you have a son and you have a child, your perception of other children changes. And so my perception of what you do changed. And I realized while I was writing this how lucky I am for Max's health. But it was funny because at one point and I say funny because it was funny, ironic, that while I was preparing this talk last week, I get a call. I got a call from a school that Max fell off the monkey bars. And I figured, well, if they didn't say anything, it wasn't that bad. But I got there, and Max had an extra elbow. And it was pretty scary. You know, and then all of a sudden your mind goes rushing through thinking, well, is he going to be able to use his hand again? What's going to happen? But we were so lucky because Winnie Palmer was right down the street. They have this amazing, amazing children's emergency room, which unfortunately I've been to once before. And, you know, when you see the doctors come in and they're all smiles and then you see their smiles change, man, it changes your perception of what's going on. And you start thinking, well, all these things that can go wrong. And we start talking about surgery. And this is just a week ago. But luckily, Max had his arm reset. They did a perfect job. We had these amazing doctors. And everything turned out fine. But it made me realize how fragile a child's health is and how lucky we are and how lucky Max is. And it makes me realize that for a lot of the children that you work with, you are their luck because they haven't had that luck yet. And you're changing their luck. I know personally how luck can change. Over the years, I've seen luck go up and down. I was born into an entrepreneurial household. I was actually born at Summerfest in Milwaukee. My parents were credited with bringing the euro to the United States. Not the money, but the sandwich. And there's an amazing New York Times article about my father. Well, they start this company, they start the distributorship, and if you've had one, he's probably come from this company. But through a series of bad events, my father had to leave that company, and he started another company, and they owned 3 restaurants. And one of these 3 restaurants was actually amazing, the vision that he had. He took a public bathhouse, a natatorium, and made it into a restaurant, and put dolphins in it, and had live dolphin shows. What was even more amazing, this was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And if you've ever been in Milwaukee, it gets down really, really cool to have live dolphin shows, have that vision. Well, the restaurants were very, very successful. But then his luck changed because Milwaukee was an industrial town. In 1981, the recession hit, and my parents lost the restaurants. They lost everything. So they moved us to Florida. And in Florida, my father realized, well, hey, he saw what was going on. Epcot had just opened. And he's like, he got into the real estate market and grew from nothing to a very successful real estate practice. In that time, he helped with a lot of the development that you see around here, a lot of the residential development. And everything was going great. And then the savings and loan crisis of the early 90s hit. Parents start to lose everything again. But this time, my father actually got sick too. He had kidney failure and lost not only the money, but had to spend a ton of money on healthcare. Had to spend a ton of money and time trying to revive himself. But still at this time, he was trying to bring it back up. All that time, I was watching and seeing how resilient a human can be. So a few months later, after this started to collapse, my grandmother passed away. My grandmother brought us up because my parents were always working. And then my parents lost their house again. And then one night, we got the call my father passed. So I was lucky though, because I was 20, I had my health, and even though I lost everything, I had the ability to go out and work, and I had the faith that I could succeed. Because that's what success is about. It's a lot of luck and a lot of faith. And for the children that you work with, you are their luck, and by giving them that lucky break, you are giving them the faith that they can succeed. You know, after that experience, I went out to work, And within a month, I was actually the #1 salesperson in my company. And it got me really interested in how you influence people, because I was taught all these sales techniques, but I never used them. I just did what came naturally to me, help people. And so over the years, I started to learn more and more about marketing. And I loved it, because influencing people, everything we do is about influencing people. You not only have to influence judges, you have to influence other volunteers to come up and help. You have to influence other attorneys to join. You have to influence people to donate to the organization. It's all about influence. And I learned as much as I could about influence. With Authentic Web, over the past 10 years, I spent hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of dollars on education. The past 2 years alone, I've spent 200 hours personally educating myself. I've read hundreds of books. I actually have a marketing podcast. I've done 223 episodes, won some awards, had some of the best entrepreneurs and marketers in the world on the podcast telling their secrets. And I tell you this not because I want you to think how great I am, but I want you to know what I learned and be able to use it to influence others. And it boils down to this. It's about the fundamentals. Because all the tricks that I've learned, and I can do some scary stuff, like that Cambridge Analytica stuff, it's nothing compared to what I've seen out there. It's pretty kind of scary. But it's not about those technicals. It's about the fundamentals. And the fundamental is storytelling. The person that tells the best story always wins. In 1962, Wilt Chamberlain was shooting 40%. He made a change to his free throw style. That year, he shot 80% from the free throw line, scored 100 points in a game. 100 points in a game has never been done before, and not since. What the free throw did was, it wasn't his superpower, but it allowed his other superpowers to shine. It's the fundamentals that allows your superpowers to shine. You're all here to learn technical things. And I've been here for 5 years. I've been in a lot of the sessions, and I see the technicals. But the storytelling is what's going to allow your superpowers, allow those technical things to shine, because those technical things will come and go. But if you're a good storyteller, you're going to be able to influence more people. What's really interesting about Wilt's 100-point game was that he shot free throws underhand, granny shots. How many NBA players do you see doing that? Not many. And the reason is not because it doesn't work. It actually has been proven to be the most effective way to shoot free throws. But NBA players don't think it's sexy. It's not cool. And that's kind of what storytelling is. We know it's important. We keep telling it over and over again, but you're not practicing it because it's not cool. It's not the latest and greatest thing. But it's that fundamental that's going to change people's minds. Nothing has changed more minds than the right story told at the right time. So how do you do that? Well, I boiled it down because I've seen people talk about storytelling, but they don't really know how to use it. And like I said, we've done the testing. I do this all the time with video, and we practice, and we do amazing insights. But it comes down to 3 simple parts to telling a great story. First, that most people skip over, is you're telling a story to one person. One person. Think about that one person, and what do you want them to do on the other side of that story? Because if you want to influence someone, you have to know who you're talking to and what you want them to do. I know it makes sense, but we skip over that. We just tell stories to tell stories. The second part to telling a great story is that you must have a collection of stories. One story isn't going to do it all. We look at the Bible, it's full of stories. Jesus had tons of stories that he told because each one has its place and time. So you must develop a collection of stories. And the third part to telling a great story is being able to craft a great story. And there are 3 acts, essential acts, like Aristotle said, to a great story. The first act is we must connect with the person. Now that you know who you're going to talk to, you must connect to that person. What are the parts of this story that are going to really connect with that person? Don't tell too much of it, but think about that. Then we must tell the story of the conflict. Get as vivid as possible. You've brought that person in. Make them feel that problem. How can you make them feel the problem? And once you make them feel the problem, give them the conclusion. Now, one of the mistakes that we often make is we give one conclusion. But in marketing and influence, we talk about heaven and hell. We paint a story of what can be really great and what can go really wrong. And now if you can really connect to the person, make them feel that conflict, and give them two paths, then the choice will be obvious. And you'll accomplish your goal. I really, really want you, of course, to be able to tell these stories. And so this is why I challenge you. You've got roughly 400 people here today. We've got some great speakers coming up telling their stories. Each of you in this room has someone that you need to influence right now, someone you're thinking about that you need to change their mind to help a child. I want you to think of that and find 3 people and tell them your problem. Ask them for their story. Don't ask them for a solution. Ask them for a story that can help. Craft that story now that you've created the collection of stories, and make those stories yours. And you'll now practice becoming a great storyteller. Because in the end, if you tell better stories, you're going to improve the luck and give that luck that child needs and give them the faith that they can succeed. Thank you.
I told Ian it wasn't really fair that we got to hear how to tell a story after we'd already planned the story we were going to tell, but we didn't have the lesson first. I'm going to tell you a nonfiction story. It has a fairy tale ending, although that ending is tinged with some sadness and some regret. The fairy tale portion wouldn't have happened without a guardian ad litem attorney who was willing to wade into some uncharted waters. So when I'm through, Roberta Katz is going to tell you how she made all this work through the legal system. The story begins with a mom who's addicted to drugs and alcohol. She has an 11-year-old daughter, Pam, and a 5-year-old son. The father of the kids is long gone. He left the family a couple years ago. The mom is high on cocaine and alcohol. She tells Pam to go get her piggy bank. Pam says no way. She knows that her mom is going to use her money to go buy drugs. Pam and her mom get into a fight. Her mom eventually grabs a belt, puts it around Pam's neck, and starts to tighten it. They struggle. Pam is eventually able to free herself. She runs out of the house. She runs down the street. She sees a neighbor outside, nobody that she knows, but she tells them what's going on, and the neighbor calls the police. As you can predict, the mom is arrested. Pam and her brother get sent to her aunt's house for the night, and the next morning there's a shelter hearing. And no surprise, the children were sheltered. The first time that Bill and I met Pam, and I should explain that Bill is my husband. He's a guardian ad litem also, and although I was the official guardian ad litem on this case, it was truly a team effort all the way through. So the first time Bill and I met Pam, she was in a group home in Okeechobee. She had stayed with her aunt and her brother for a few weeks, but her aunt decided that she was causing her brother to be a problem and wanted her out. So we sat actually in her bedroom in the group home and asked her a very open-ended question. We just said, so, what happened? And we were rather astounded when Pam started kind of this free flow of information with her story. She told us things like, I just told you about how her mom had tried to strangle her. She told us about coming home from school one day, finding her dad in the bathtub with a needle in his arm, and she thought he was dead. She told us about her mom waking her up at 4 in the morning to go on her newspaper delivery route with her. She told her how she got in really big trouble with her mom for making a mess in the kitchen And we said, well, why? And she said, well, it was her job to get her brother up in the morning, get him dressed, feed him breakfast, so he would be ready for school. Her brother said he was tired of cereal, and she was trying to make him blueberry pancakes, and she made a mess, and she got in trouble. And she told us how her mom hid her drugs in the back of the bathroom cabinet. So even though we had read the shelter petition, hearing those kinds of details from an 11-year-old was very sobering. And it's also interesting to note that after that very frank outpouring of information, from that time forward, Sandy was very, very reluctant to tell her story to anybody. At this point, Pam's mother realized she was going to prison. She decided to surrender her rights, although it was clear in court that that was a very hard thing for her to do. Pam's dad was a no-show for court. I'd had several conversations with him. He was living up north. He was going to come down. He was going to, do the right thing for his kids, but he didn't. He was a no-show. So both parents' rights were terminated. Back to Pam, so to recap. So she'd been with her aunt and her brother for a few weeks, a month. Then she got moved to a group home in Okeechobee without her brother. And that placement didn't last very long either. So she ended up in a therapeutic facility over in Bradenton. So Bill and I went over to Bradenton to see her. And we took her to the beach. We went out to lunch. We walked the pier. And she said, I just want to be a regular kid. I just want to be a regular kid. And that was kind of a reoccurring theme in her story. The Bradenton placement didn't last very long either. Sandy got mad at a custodian who was mopping the hallway. She grabbed his mop and whacked him in the knees. So Sandy's next placement, this is now a year after her shelter. This is her 4th placement. She's at a residential psychiatric facility, Sandy Pines, in Tequesta. We wanted to keep Sandy connected with her brother, so we would pick him up and take him down to see her, get a pass for her so we could take them to the park or to the beach so they could go swimming, fix a picnic lunch, do those kinds of things. One of the really wonderful things that happened at the psychiatric facility at Sandy Pines was that Pam made a connection with a therapist, who was called Dr. Jerry. She was finally willing, after about a year now, to tell her story and work through some of that and begin to move forward. The bad news that after Sandy had been there, after Pam had been there for 9 months, her therapist said that Pam was going to have a very hard time recognizing anybody as her mother who wasn't her mother. And I will tell you that that turned out to be a very prophetic statement. When Pam was ready to be released from Sandy Pines, she was placed with her brother again at Hibiscus Children's Center. However, the upper age limit for the kids that they took was around 11 or 12. So after a relatively short stay there with her brother, they were moved to a foster home, a very kind older lady in Fort Pierce. A wonderful person, absolutely no match for Pam and her brother. So again, they were moved, this time to Florida, or Baptist group home in Jacksonville. So even though they were on the same campus, there were a number of houses on the campus, so they were on the same campus. They were not in the same house. They did not have the same house parents, but they did see each other every day. It was very clear that adoption needed to be a priority, and it was time for a permanent home. There was a divorced woman who was very eager to adopt both kids. The initial meeting went very well. She brought pictures of her house. They talked about the kinds of things that they like to do. The woman had an extended family who was very interested in being part of the children's lives. To get to know Pam a little better, the woman picked Pam up and took her shopping. And Pam became furious that the woman would not buy her black t-shirts with skeletons all over them. And then on the way home in the car, Pam told her that she had been arrested when she tried to kill the custodian at the Bradenton placement. The woman got scared off, and that adoption was off the table. Our next attempt at the adoption just really seemed like a slam dunk. This was a married couple, both physicians, one a pediatrician, a multi-million-dollar house, a swimming pool, all the toys you can possibly imagine. So Bill and I spent several Saturdays taking Pam and her brother over to the house, getting to know the family. The couple had an older son who was in high school. They played in the pool. They helped fix lunch. They picked out new colors for their bedroom. And the kids actually moved in there. All was well for about a week, and then Pam decided she wanted out. When she left, her brother stopped going to school. The family got cold feet and said, you know, we didn't realize it was going to be like this. This just isn't going to work out. Our third adoption effort was with a couple in their mid-30s. They were very active, smart, fun. They like to do the kinds of things that kids like to do. They like to skateboard. They like to go to theme parks. So the kids started spending weekends with them. They would be in their group home during the week, go to school, and then go to this couple's house on the weekends. So Bill and I went up to visit them a couple times. And the second time we were up there, I said to Pam's brother, "Looks like you really like it here." And he said, "I would have been happy in any of these places." As you've probably guessed, the next weekend, Pam decided, I'm not going to visit. And that was the end of Pam and adoption. It was clearly time for some hard decisions. Pam's brother was real tired of the placement merry-go-round and wanted off. And so a very hard decision was made, because you know we don't separate siblings, but we needed to let Pam's brother get adopted. Pam was absolutely devastated. I want to backtrack a little and give you an update on Pam's mom. She served 2 years in prison. She had a job within 2 weeks of getting out of prison. She was taking meds for her bipolar disorder. She was attending counseling. She eventually completed 2 years of parole. She paid all her fees and was doing well. She had a relationship with a man that she had met in middle school who was really supportive of her new lifestyle. So during this 2-year parole period, Pam had contact with some of her relatives, so she knew what was going on with her mom. And she started to push for the impossible. She wanted to be reunited with her mom. Devereaux is our community-based care agency in the 19th Circuit, and they had something called the Permanency Roundtable. High-level executives in the organization would get together and see if they could brainstorm ways to get permanency for kids who'd been in the system way too long. They don't just meet once and give you some good ideas and say, you know, hope some of this works. They actually leave each meeting with a plan, with assignments, with a timeline, and then they come back in a couple months and see what happened and what steps need to be taken. I had never heard of PRT, but I was really happy to get invited to come and tell Pam's story and see if we could get some ideas for moving forward. So prior to the PRT, I tracked down Dr. Jerry, the therapist that had been successful with Pam when she was back at Sandy Pines in the first year when she was sheltered. She was no longer at Sandy Pines. She was in private practice. I told the story of what had happened to Sandy since the last time she had seen her. And I asked her if it could be arranged if she would be willing to see Sandy in her private practice. And she said she would. And she reminded me of her prediction from the end of that first year that Pam would have a very difficult time accepting anybody as her mother than her mother. At the first PRT meeting, one of the stories I told was about Sandy's lack of a willingness through all of these various placements. She always got counseling of some sort, that she would never really open up to therapists. So I told the PRT team, one of Pam's therapists said to me that Pam had told her, "You tell me your secrets, I'll tell you mine." After that, I heard Carol Deloche, the CEO of Devereaux, lean over to one of her staff and say, "Set up the counseling with Dr. Jerry." At that point, I thought, oh my gosh, maybe Pam's dream really could come true. I was very much premature, but it was the first really positive thing that had happened in a long time. Although things were moving in a positive direction in many respects, Pam was really reeling from the loss of her brother. And although his adopted parents had originally been very comfortable with Pam being in touch with him, that changed when they overheard her on the phone telling him to run away. Placement changes every couple months were occurring for Pam. She had placements in Daytona, in Fort Lauderdale, in Fort Pierce, in Sarasota, in Port St. Lucie. She eventually had 18 placements in 5 years. Back to some positive things. The individual sessions between Pam and Dr. Jerry began and were becoming very effective and useful. Then Devereaux agreed to also fund individual therapy with Dr. Jerry and Pam's mother. So the next obvious step was for mother and child to have joint therapy with Dr. Jerry. And Roberta's going to be talking with you shortly about how she made that happen through the legal system because there were no contact orders. Bill and I will never forget witnessing the reunion between Pam and her mother after 4 years of being apart. It was like this never-ending hug with many tears of joy. During the period that all this therapy was going on with Pam and her mom, Bill and I desperately tried to do what we could to stabilize her placements. And if she needed to be moved, to at least keep her in the vicinity of Martin County where her mom was living and where it wasn't too far to Dr. Jerry's. We also knew it was important to stabilize her school placement so she could start having some academic success. So Pam started spending a lot of weekends with us at our house. It gave the foster parents a needed break, and it also it gave her a chance to see a positive husband-wife relationship. One night before she was going to bed, she said, "So you guys don't ever fight?" We drove her 40 miles to see Dr. Jerry every other week so that her case manager didn't have to make the trip weekly. When Pam got into a physical altercation with the school resource officer and was told she would be expelled, I wrote a 3-page letter to the team that reviewed expulsions, telling her story, and they ended up suspending her for just 2 weeks if she would be part of a restitution, or not restitution, be in a diversion program. And the diversion program required community service hours, so Bill and I made arrangements for her to start her Saturday mornings at the Humane Society cleaning out cages before she came to our house for the rest of the weekend. The joint therapy between Pam and her mom continued throughout this period. Eventually, the therapist determined it would be appropriate for Pam to live with her mother. For the rest of the story, I'm going to turn it over to Roberta, who's going to explain to you how Pam's mom became her non-relative caregiver. Roberta?
So if you're a guardian ad litem attorney in this room, you know that you have those guardians that are your go-to guardians, right? I won't put anyone on the spot, Alan's watching. You have those go-to guardians, and that's Bill and Faye for me. And yet when they call with something, you almost don't want to take the phone call. Because when I say, where are we going with this case, and it starts with, well, I think I'm going to be doing something I didn't expect to do. And funny enough, it happens a lot on their cases. Maybe it's because I assign them the cases that I can't figure out what to do on. So we get to PRT, and Faye had warned me what she was going to bring up at PRT. She says, I'm going to suggest the biological mother. And I will refer to her as the biological mother because in court I refused to refer to her as the mother because I had terminated her rights. That's another part of the story that I don't think Faye has conveyed. We were the team on the termination of parental rights. I was the attorney. And one of Alan's big platforms is sometimes the only stable person in a child's life in the dependency system is their guardian ad litem, right? So Faye was there from shelter. I was there a couple months after. So we are the people. CLS looked at me in the eye every time I came to court and said, you were the one that terminated her parental rights. And I said, yes. Yes, I did. And now I'm going to tell you why we shouldn't have done that or why we're going to put her back. So first we file a motion for contact in dependency court. And the idea was to begin with, the therapist wanted to begin slow. We were all in agreement this was going to be a slow process. So it's going to begin with letters. Letters between Pam and the biological mother. And then we would get to a point, since they're both having individual therapy with Dr. Jerry, they'll have family therapy. And then they'll have therapeutic visitation. So the therapist was going to be in control. We wanted to make sure it was very clear Pam was not in control, because it might appear from this story, as you listen to Faye, that Pam was in control. And DCF, the CLS attorney, kept saying to me, you're letting this child choose. And a part of me said, yeah, we are. You know why? Because nothing else is working. Nothing else is working. This is where we think outside the box, because nothing's working. After 3 failed adoptions, nothing's working. So it was an hour-and-a-half evidentiary hearing. And my star witness was the biological mother, who I did not prep. I should probably whisper that. I did not prep my witness at all. My thought was I had gotten everything from Faye. I knew the answers. And if I prepped this witness, I didn't feel like I was going to get a good story. Did you like the way I worked that in? I didn't feel like I was going to get a good story in front of the court, because that's who mattered at this point. That's who mattered. Even though CLS fought me the whole way, which they should have. It's not a criticism of my CLS attorney. But she had to tell her story. And I felt like I was going to get more honest answers if I didn't prep her and tell her what I was going to ask. Now, you're all attorneys. You could probably figure out what I was going to ask. And whether she could or couldn't predict that, I don't know. But she was on the stand for a really long time. She cried on the stand. Pam did yell at me later for making her mom cry. And the judge said to her, you are what we hope happens when we send someone to jail. Because he came from a background in felony court. And he said, you epitomize what we hope happens when we send somebody to jail. And it was hard to listen to her story. And I'm going to tell you, as a GAL attorney, I struggled with this. Every time Faye called, I struggled with, is this the right thing to do? Is this in the child's best interest? We don't want to make it seem flippant. We had a lot of staffings. a lot. We had internal staffings, we had staffings, I like to call them up the chain. We had plenty of staffings with our legal team, way higher than me. Sometimes it was after the fact, because I like to do that. But we had a lot of staffings to discuss, and it came down to best interest. That was the best interest of the child. So the biological mother had to tell what she learned in jail, where she was in her rehabilitation, where she was at that time in her life. Her articulation of the issues and her solutions and where she was at that time impressed the judge. I told you, he said, "You're what we hope happens." So the department did present their testimony on their objection based on the termination of rights of the biological mother, but the dependency judge did grant the motion to begin the contact. Now, she's on probation at this point, and I want to say it was August, and she was off probation in about November. So we actually didn't have that many months. We could have waited. We chose not to. So we had the biological mother file a motion in criminal court to modify her probation order. The public defender's been discharged at that point. I called the state attorney to get this set for hearing because the biological mother's phone calls were being ignored. State attorney says, I'm not setting anything. Why don't you set the hearing? And I thought, okay, I mean, if you're not going to object. So I called the JA and said, what do you have available? She gave me a couple dates, and I picked the date by my calendar because I wanted to be there. Faye and I go, and the judge was actually, the judge filling in that day was the chief judge who does our swearing-ins for volunteers. So he come in, he sees me, and he says, and we all introduce ourselves, and he says, but Ms. Katz, what are you here for? And I said, I'm here for the best interest of the child on behalf of the Guardian Ad Litem program. And he said, okay, so what do you want to argue? So I argued the motion while the state attorney watched me, and the public defender watched because they're not technically appointed. And I told him what I wanted, and he says, why don't you just wait for November? And I said, because then we can monitor. What's the harm? Why can't we start now? What's the reason for a delay? And he said, okay. Gosh, if I had the dependency court order, I could just mirror that. And I said, this one right here that I had a certified copy of, what I had already gotten? He said, yes, that one right there. So everyone's in agreement. I can just sign an order modifying exactly as the dependency court order says, right? And the state attorney, again, who really had not reviewed anything, said yes. So we got that. And then every time the therapist recommended expanding visitation, we would go to court because the department could not agree. And we would tell the story again. Another hour evidentiary hearing. The therapist would testify how the therapeutic visits are going. We'd talk about the contact in the meantime. We'd talk about where mom was in her rehabilitation, what she had done. We would bring out, because as attorneys, you know, we don't want to be surprised, right? So I would bring out what brought us here. Every hearing we went that way. And the department would put on their testimony, which was, again, the objection because whatever we were trying to do, the objection based on termination of parental rights of the biological mother. In the meantime, we get a new judge. So we have to start the storytelling over. And the second judge, lucky for us, followed the story and said, great, let's keep going. And again, I want to emphasize the department objection was valid. And that's why we would spend the time on an evidentiary hearing, because it was a valid objection. They could not approve the biological mother for visitation. They couldn't approve her for anything. We had terminated her parental rights for physical abuse, and she had the child abuse conviction on her record. But the team felt, here we have those staffings again in the Guardian Ad Litem program, the team felt, and the advocacy team, the primary advocacy team, was not in disagreement after Faye twisted my arm. We were totally in agreement. This is the way we had to go. It was unconventional, we can all agree. There were raised eyebrows every time we brought it up. They didn't come down. Every time we brought it up, they'd be like, are you trying it again? Well, I mean, we're just going to keep going. We're going to keep going on this path. Every time I got to court, the CLS attorney would say to me, you going to ask for placement today? And I'm like, not today. So the therapist does recommend placement. That was about May Extensive hearing, and you'll see every hearing pretty much followed the same path. It was an hour, it was an evidentiary hearing, and we went through how did we get here, how the case came in, what happened, how the therapy was going, where had we gone. And we anticipated setbacks with Pam, and I'm going to tell you, we didn't have them. The one thing that may be a setback, but it really wasn't, Faye talked about her grades, and at one time she was getting a D in chorus. And I'm going to stand up and tell you, I can't sing, but I don't take chorus, right? That's the solution. So this is an elective, and she got a D. And I said to Faye, tell her I don't work for Ds. So she's going to have to bring that up. She did. She brought it up to a B. So the court overrides the home study, which was denied because of the termination of parental rights, placed Pam in the home of the biological mother as a non-relative placement. We figure we're going slow. I mean, Faye and I have had this discussion. We're talking adoption just between the two of us, but we're like, we're going to go slow. 6 months, 9 months, whatever it takes. We're waiting for the backlash from Pam. And as I already mentioned, there was no backlash. In September, the therapist calls Faye and says, we're ready to be out of their lives. We can do an adoption. We set a status hearing because we know an adoption home study is not going to pass, right? Non-relative placement didn't pass, so we have an adoption home study that's not going to pass. The new judge, who'd already allowed the placement, said, I'm going to hear a petition for adoption. Are you going to file it, Ms. Katz? I said, okay. We have a staffing with the Guardian Ad Litem program, a pretty significant one. Mary Kay was on it, where we all talked about, what do we do? Do we hire an attorney? Well, what if I have the petition? Well, can we file it? And we decided, there was some discussion. If department doesn't consent to adoption, there's no adoption subsidy. But she's her biological mother. Okay, they won't get the adoption subsidy. That wasn't as surprising as there was also going to be no tuition waiver, and there was going to be no Medicaid. We went back to Carol DeLoach at the CBC to clarify. She called Tallahassee. Those things are not happening. So that was the sticking point when I did staff with the Guardian Ad Litem program. What are they going to do? So I called the biological mother, and I said, what's your plan? And she said, my plan is to take care of my child, because that's my job. And they had a plan for insurance. They'd already actually looked into family insurance through the husband's employment. And they would get a grant or a loan for college, if that's the way Pam wanted to go. Just, you know, she was thinking about being a tattoo artist, so they were thinking they might not need college tuition. I've seen some pictures lately. I think she might be going down that path. So whatever you want to be, right? We always say children can be whatever they want to be. But they had a plan. So I went back to our legal team and said, they have a plan. And they said, okay, let's file the petition. Can you get a copy? Can you get a form? Yep, I can get a form. I called the attorney that does the adoptions for our CBC. I called him and said, hey, can I have your form? He goes, yes. Here's my form. Here's my final judgment. Do you want me to be there that day to walk you through it? Okay, no problem. I did the form, sent it to the parents, said, you'll need to have it notarized. Meet me at the clerk's office, because the clerk's office, just so you know, came to every hearing. They came to every hearing to figure out what was going on with Pam. They would see me in the hallways and say, any update on Pam? And I'm like, I'm filing a motion next week. We're ready. So when I met them, I made an appointment at the clerk's office. I said, I'm coming to file Pam's petition for adoption. They're like, okay. And they helped her fill out the financial affidavit, made sure there was no need for fees. When I called the mother and said, what's the plan to take care of your child? And she said, that's my job. I did also speak to Pam. I talked about college tuition, talked about how she wasn't going to get the waiver, because I'm sure she knew that that was an option, because all of our children know, right? She says to me, but I'll have my mom. And that's the bottom line here. She would have her mom. We filed the petition for adoption. This is the longest adoption hearing we've ever had. You guys know they take 30 seconds. This one took an hour and a half. Because we did go through the denied home study. We put on the evidence, the monetary benefits that were not going to be received by the family. They acknowledged it in court. We went through the progression of the case, the original allegations. The dependency court granted the adoption as being in the best interest of the child. And in this telling this story, we learn the importance of allowing guardians to transport kids and have them in their homes when appropriate. He didn't pay me to say that. That was actually Faye. The importance of having flexibility with funding systems so arrangements can be made to work with providers not in the usual network. That's where we got Dr. Jerry. The importance of school stability and when placement changes must be made to make them during semester breaks so education is not so heavily impacted. The importance of allowing GAL attorneys, allowing might be a bad word, allowing GAL attorneys to go to criminal court to advocate for an outcome in the child's best interest. And I think we can't overlook the importance of having a guardian, the same guardian on a case for 6 years, and who isn't afraid to make waves. Thank you.
Okay. So the rest of the story is Mary Kay Wimsett, right out of law school, was a public defender in my courtroom, and so I always get the phone call when she needs a speaker. But I'm not going to block your number, I promise. All right, so here's the scenario. It's a contested reunification. The department's attorney vehemently opposes the reunification. The parent's attorney obviously supports the reunification. The GAL attorney supports the reunification. And after I've heard from all the lawyers and their argument, I turn to the GAL volunteer. And I say, what do you think I should do? And she proceeds to give me a very heartfelt argument for reunification. And then she finishes her comments to the court with, and if reunification doesn't occur today, it will be a travesty. So I picked myself off the floor, put myself back in my chair, and you can all understand the way I ruled. I was talking to a volunteer that was passionate about what she did, and that was the strongest argument. When I summons people to jury duty, I love to, and I've been doing this for 28 years, I love to ask the panel, how many of you got giddy when you got your jury summons? 28 years, nobody has ever raised their hand. And I almost think that if somebody did, I might say, we need to get psychological. But I asked the group here today, how many of you are here today to get rich? How many of you here today are here for the power and the prestige? As Mary Kay said yesterday, we are real lawyers. So this is my point. I know that all of you are here today because you are passionate about what you do. And when you're in court, let that passion show through. Because from the perspective of a judge, it is very persuasive. These are not eminent domain cases. Come on. Be passionate if you feel strongly about your argument. And I, as a court, appreciate that. All right, that's the first rule. Be passionate when you're in court. Second rule is, when the car goes out in the morning to go to court, somebody better have the kids in the back of the car, because I want to see the kids in court. I have 5 children. Back when I drove a minivan and had all 5 kids in the back of the minivan, we didn't get invited anywhere. Nobody invited us to pool parties. Nobody gave us their keys to their mountain cabin and said, sure, use it for the weekend. There are 2 places in this world where kids are encouraged to come: Walt Disney World and Dependency Court. Bring the kids. And the reason why I say that is not all testimony and evidence is verbal. When a case gets called into the courtroom, I watch who's carrying that baby. I watch who's holding that little boy's hand. Who's carrying the diaper bag? Who remembered to bring the Cheerio treats? When they're standing there, when the children are standing there in court, who are they snuggling up against? When I have the little Mighty Mice guy that's bouncing off the walls and he's getting ready to pull down my blinds, who goes and makes sure that he's behaving himself? That speaks very loudly to the court. In a shelter care case where they haven't seen their parents, I want to see the children's reaction when they see their parents. That's really important. Ultimately, what I want to know when I'm looking at reunification or concurrent goals, I want to know about the bond that's there. I had a case one time where the mother had basically dragged her feet through most of the case, and we were at permanency. And there was obviously a discussion about, do we go with the concurrent goal, or do we continue to slog towards reunification? And I would have been strongly supported by the record to move to alternative goals. But before I did that, I looked down at the mother. Both the little boys were hugging her from both sides, and she had the look in her face as if she was ready to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel. And I looked at that and I said, no, we're going to continue to work with reunification. And that case did subsequently reunify. And as I think about that case, there's really nothing I can remember about that case other than the look on those 3 people as we're talking about concurrent goals and the decision that I had to make. That was the most important piece of evidence, and nothing was said by the mother or the 2 little boys. The other thing about bringing the kids to court is it gives them a voice. I had a case in front of me where there was rumblings about a little boy. He was in about 3rd grade, and he'd been placed with his grandmother and his step-grandfather, and that he was not happy. Guardian ad litem said, he's going to want to talk to you. I said, okay. Immediately my heart clutched because I think the worst. And so as I'm pondering what he's going to tell me and how bad it's going to be, what the step-grandfather is doing, I have him back in my office, and we've got the GAL there, and nobody really knows, but they know the placement is not stable right now. And I said to the little guy, because I didn't want to put it to him in technical terms, I said, well, how are things getting along? Well, not so good. What's going on? Well, I want to move someplace else. So I'm thinking, I have to be delicate about this, and I have to be sensitive to what he might be able to give up. And I said, well, tell me, Bud, what's going on? He says, I placed him in the summer. This is now close to winter. And he says, well, when I go to school in the morning, he makes me put on long pants, and my legs get all sweaty, and I can't stand sweaty legs. I'm like, wow, yeah, I can imagine that bothers you. But I think we can take care of that. Went back in, gently talked about the problem, never heard that there was a problem with the placement after that. They came to their peace. I had another little girl that was having bad nightmares, and her nightmares were very specific. It was that she had had 2 placements, first with her stepfather. Her mother had passed away, her stepfather, and then the second placement was with her step-grandmother. And she was having nightmares, both of whom had abused her. She was having nightmares that someone would come in the middle of the night, snatch her out of the bed, and take her away. I suspected that that might have had something to do with her placements. So we talked in my office, and I said, by the way, how are you getting along? And she was now with her maternal grandmother and was doing very well. But the nightmares were preventing her from sleeping, and the grandmother was very concerned about the nightmares. They were not being addressed in therapy to any satisfaction. It dawned on me that I might have the key to change those nightmares, because it dawned on me that if I came to a pact with her, and I didn't talk about the fact she was having nightmares, I didn't talk about, the troubles that I was hearing about, I just said, by the way, I want to have a pact with you. You will not be taken from your grandmother unless I see you first and we decide that that's the best thing. No more nightmares. They stopped. It was all about her needing to know that she had a connection and that it wasn't a possibility. So put the kids in the car, please. Next thing, start your presentation with a positive note. We all are here working towards the better good of this child, hoping for reunification. Even if mom or dad is not doing the greatest, and you got to go into that at some point in the hearing, start the presentation with a positive note. If you can't find the positive note, then you might want to go to the presentation on compassion fatigue, because there is a positive note that we can find no matter how bad things are. The mother and father need to hear that, because it tells them that this is a team effort. We recognize that they are trying. And even if you can't say nothing good, even if there's nothing good to say about their actions, recognize that they love their child unconditionally. They may not be able to step forward as a parent, but there's a lot of love there. So start it. The other thing is the kids need to hear. They need to hear, oh, good, my mom is doing something right. My dad is okay. Even it kind of tempers what's going to come in the rest of the hearing if they know that everybody is starting their presentation with a positive note. All right. When I was back in my earlier days, I was insurance defense lawyer, and we were down in LaBelle, Florida, and we were trying a multi-million-dollar insurance claim. And I was given an opportunity to cross-examine a key witness for the plaintiff, and I scored 100%, basically. I got him to concede what I wanted him to concede. It was a huge piece of evidence for our side of the case, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. And I sat down next to my mentor, the lead attorney, and I thought he was going to say, good job. And instead, he said, you got him down on the ground, but you didn't kick him. Those rules are gone in dependency court. Nobody better be kicking anybody once they get them on the ground, because here is the aftermath. If it's a contested dependency and you win, the department wins the dependency, what comes after that? The disposition and the case plan. You don't want your parent dead on arrival. So you have to be very delicate about dealing with the issues that present themselves in dependency court. And this is what I tell parents that are in front of me from the shelter, because I like to set the tone right from the get-go if I have to grant the shelter. And what I say to them is, look, most of them have experiences, a lot of them do, in criminal court. And they feel like they're being criminalized and they feel like it's another criminal charge. And I say, look, this is not about accusations bearing some criminal consequences. This is a civil case. We are all here as your cheerleaders. We are all going to help provide you services. We want you to work as hard as possible with those services. And while you're working on those services, we're going to make sure your child's okay and taken care of. It's got to be, the orientation right from the get-go has to be collaborative. Which leads me to the next point. Typically, as lawyers, when we go through a law school, we're taught, to save as much firepower as possible for the court hearing, the contested court hearing. Do not save your firepower. Don't wait to be collaborative just because you're in front of the judge. If somebody didn't send you the report and you're entitled to the report, don't wait till you come to court to fuss about it in front of me. I don't want to hear it. In fact, the only person that I'm going to cross-examine about that is the person fussing about how they didn't get this report or that report. I'm going to say, why didn't you pick up the phone? Why didn't you call that lawyer? Why didn't you find out what was going on? Because I don't want to spend valuable court time listening to somebody fuss about what another lawyer didn't do. I find that trials by subterfuge is a strategy that ends in unfair rulings. All right, next point, get your facts straight. One of the things that frustrates me so much is when I'm in a hearing and I hear that one of the parents is dropping dirty UAs or not going to visitation, and the response on the other side is, that's not true. I'm like, why do we have a factual dispute about something that is clearly able to be proven with the right documentations? So many times I will hear, well, I look at the department and they'll say, well, my file is at the office. That is not a winning argument if you're trying to establish that a parent is not doing something they need to be doing. So I encourage everybody to bring your supporting documentations. If we're talking about phone calls or showing up for visitation, I want to see the log, because nothing can be as persuasive as that in terms of determining what actually happened. All right, and then last, first I want to give a shout out. The other thing that I really appreciate from all of you is, as a judge, I'm looking at the big picture, and I'm really trying to figure out what's the fair and right thing to do for this child, what is in that child's best interest. I appreciate my GAL lawyers, and this is where I give the shout out to Eric Embry, make sure that we technically have a record that is strong. And Eric Embry, I don't know wherever you are, but I appreciate he'll say, but for the record, Judge, we have to establish this and this, and then that's really, and I appreciate that, because sometimes I'm so busy looking at the big picture, I'm not getting the minutia in the record that I need to have. So I appreciate that for the lawyers that are out there. And then the last thing I want to say is, this goes back to my original story, is I do turn to people in court and say, well, what do you think? And when I say that, when I ask you for your opinion, it's because I know you are passionate and your opinion counts. Please don't look at me and say, well, that's up to you, Judge. No, I really want to know what you think. I know I'm not bound by your opinion, but I really want to know what you think. And you all have opinions, and those opinions are important to me. Please tell me when I say, what do you think? Thank you.